Introduction. In the summer of 1920, the air in Nashville, Tennessee was thick with heat and tension. Men and women crowded the hallways of the state capitol, their shirts soaked with sweat. Everyone was wearing a flower on their lapel. If you supported a woman's right to vote, you wore a yellow rose. If you were against it, you wore a red rose. This was the War of the Roses, and the future of millions of American women hung by a single thread. The vote was tied. One man held the power to break it, a 24-year-old legislator named Harry Byrne. On his suit jacket he wore a bright red rose. He was a good boy from a small town, and his political mentors had told him that giving women the vote would ruin the country. He had spent weeks listening to voices telling him to stay quiet, to follow the rules, and to keep things the way they had always been. But inside his pocket, Harry had a letter. It was from his mother, Phoebe. It wasn't a long letter, and it didn't use big fancy words. She simply wrote, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." Mrs. Cat was a leader in the movement for women's rights. Phoebe wasn't a politician or a world leader. She was a mother on a farm, but she had a voice that her son trusted more than the angry crowds in the hallway. When it was Harry's turn to vote, the room went silent. He looked down at the red rose on his chest. Then he thought of his mother's letter. He whispered, "I." The room exploded. People began throwing their hats in the air. Some cried and some screamed in anger. Harry actually had to hide in a window ledge and climb out of the building to escape the men who were furious with him. Later he explained his choice simply. "I know that a mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow." That single "I" changed the world. But it started with a woman who had the courage to speak up when she was just a mother on a farm. Phoebe Byrne didn't have a seat in the Capitol, but she had a voice. She didn't let the red roses of her time tell her she was too small or too unimportant to make a difference. The voice that holds you back. Most of us have a war of the roses going on inside our own heads every single day. On one side, there's the person you want to be. She is bold, she has ideas. She wants to apply for that big promotion or tell a friend that her feelings were hurt. She is wearing the yellow rose of courage. On the other side is the inner critic. This voice wears the red rose. It tells you to stay quiet. It tells you that if you speak up, people will think you are difficult or too much. It whispers that you aren't ready yet, or that you need more experience before you can lead. It tells you that your value is based on how much you can do for others and how little space you can take up. Mrs. Gable was the woman who first taught me about this internal battle. She was my high school debate coach, but she was more like a life commander. She was a tiny woman who wore sharp suits and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down her nose. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see your thoughts. One afternoon, I was sitting in her classroom, staring at my notes for a competition. I was terrified. I told her, "I don't think I can do this. The other team is older. They look like they know what they're doing. I'm just going to mess it up." Mrs. Gable pulled up a chair and sat right in front of me. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She didn't give me a "you can do it" pep talk. Instead, she pointed to an empty chair in the corner of the room. "Imagine your fear is sitting in that chair," she said. "Give it a name. Give it a face. Right now, that fear is driving the car and you're stuck in the trunk. Your job today isn't to make the fear go away. You can't kill fear. Your job is to tell the fear to get out of the driver's seat and sit in the back. It can come along for the ride, but it doesn't get to touch the steering wheel." That was the first time I realized that I didn't have to wait until I felt confident to act. Confidence wasn't a feeling you had to wait for like a bus. It was a muscle you built by doing things while you were still shaking. Mrs. Gable taught me that the loudest voice in the room is usually the one inside your own head, and it's usually lying to you. The cost of playing small. We often think that being quiet or staying in the background is the safe choice. We think that if we don't take risks, we won't get hurt. But there is a high price for playing small. When you hold back your ideas at work, you feel invisible. When you say yes to things you hate doing because you're afraid to say no, you feel exhausted. This struggle isn't just in your head. It shows up in the world around us. A few years ago, a big company called Hewlett-Packard did a study on how men and women apply for jobs. They found something shocking. Men would apply for a job if they met only 60% of the requirements. They thought, I can learn the rest later. But women would only apply if they met 100% of the requirements. They felt they had to be perfect before they could even try. This is what experts call the confidence gap. It's the wall that keeps brilliant women from reaching their full potential. It's the feeling that you are an imposter, and that any day now, everyone is going to find out you don't actually know what you're doing. Think about how much time you spend auditing yourself. You write an email, then delete it. You rewrite it 3 times to make sure you don't sound mean. You wait for 3 other people to agree with an idea before you say it out loud. You apologize for things that aren't your fault, like the weather or someone else being late. All of that energy is being wasted. It's like running a race while wearing a backpack full of bricks. This book is about putting those bricks down. It's about moving from being a supporting character in everyone else's story to being the lead in your own. A promise of transformation. By the time you finish this workbook, you won't just feel better about yourself. Feelings come and go. Instead, you will have a new way of seeing the world. You will move from seeking external approval to having internal validation. What does that look like? It means when you make a mistake, you don't spend 3 days beating yourself up. You see it as a sketch in progress, not a total failure. It means you can say no to a request that drains your energy without feeling a mountain of guilt. It means you can walk into a room and feel like you belong there, not because you are perfect, but because you are enough exactly as you are. It means your inner critic might still talk, but you will have the tools to turn the volume down until it's just background noise. This isn't about bubble bath self-care. It's not about just telling yourself you're pretty in the mirror. This is deep structural work. We are going to look at the history of how women have been taught to be good girls, and how we can unlearn those lessons. We are going to use tools that help you manage the physical feeling of anxiety, like that tight knot in your stomach or your racing heart. I know this works because I have seen it in thousands of women. I have seen it in the research of people like Dr. Kristen Neff, who proves that being kind to yourself actually makes you more successful than being hard on yourself. I have seen it in the lives of historical giants who started out just as nervous as we are. Meet Elena. To see how this works in real life, I want you to meet Elena Vance. Elena is 34 years old and lives in Seattle. She's a senior project manager at a big engineering firm. If you looked at her office, you would see someone who has it all together. Her desk is perfectly organized. Her spreadsheets are flawless. She's the person everyone goes to when they need something fixed, because they know Elena will never say no. But inside, Elena is tired. She feels like she is faking it. Every morning, she drinks 2 cups of coffee just to deal with the pit of anxiety in her stomach. She hasn't asked for a raise in 4 years, even though she does the work of 3 people. She's afraid her boss Marcus will think she's being difficult or greedy. Last Tuesday, Elena received an email. There is an opening for a director position. It's the job she has dreamed of for years. She read the job description. It asks for 10 years of experience. Elena has 8.5. The red rose voice in her head started immediately. You aren't ready. You don't have enough years. Someone else will be better. Don't embarrass yourself. Elena felt that familiar knot in her stomach. She looked at the apply button for a long time. Then she closed the tab. She told herself she was just being realistic. She went back to her spreadsheets and tried to ignore the feeling that she was disappearing a little more every day. Elena is like many of us. She is waiting for permission to be great. She is waiting for someone to tell her she is ready. She doesn't realize that the only person who can give her that permission is the woman staring back at her in the mirror. Throughout this book, we are going to follow Elena. We will see her learn to set boundaries with her boss. We will see her handle a project failure without crumbling. We will see her find her compass and finally stop following the map that everyone else drew for her. Her journey is your journey. The path ahead. This book is divided into 3 stages: the foundation, the challenge, and the mastery. In the first few chapters, we will work on the foundation. We will learn how to identify the inner critic and understand where that voice came from. We will look at the life of Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a painfully shy girl who thought she was an ugly duckling, but grew up to be one of the most powerful women in the world. We will learn how to separate who you are from what people say about you. Next, we will move into the challenge. This is where we get practical. We will talk about boundaries, how to build gates that let the good things in and keep the draining things out. We will explore the perfectionist trap and why doing B- work can sometimes be an act of bravery. We will look at Maya Angelou's life to see how silence can be a cage, and how speaking your truth is the only way to be free. Finally, we will reach mastery. This is where we build lasting empowerment. We will learn tools for navigating the storm of anxiety when it hits. We will find out who you are when you stop performing for others. We will look at how to handle failure with resilience, using it as a pivot rather than a dead end. The internal gallery. Before we begin, I want to introduce one more idea that Mrs. Gable shared with me. She called it the internal gallery. She said that most people have a museum inside their heads. But instead of beautiful art, we hang portraits of our failures. We have a giant framed painting of that time we tripped in the 3rd grade. We have a lit-up display of the moment we said something stupid in a meeting. We walk through this gallery every day, looking at our mistakes, and we think, this is who I am. The secret, Mrs. Gable whispered, is that you are the curator. You get to decide what stays on the walls. You can take down the portrait of the bad hair day and put up a portrait of persistence instead. This workbook is your chance to rearrange your gallery. It is your chance to take down the old, dusty pictures of your not enoughness and hang up something new. You don't need to be fearless to start this book. You just need to be curious. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to ask the questions. Like Phoebe Byrne writing that letter, or Harry Byrne whispering "I," or Elena Vance looking at that apply button, every big change starts with one small brave act. Your I is waiting. It is time to stop being the supporting character in your own life. It is time to let the fear sit in the back seat and put your hands on the steering wheel. Let's begin. 1. Mastering the art of inner quiet. He is very kind, but he is also very busy. Young Eleanor Roosevelt wrote those words in a letter, trying to make sense of a father she loved but rarely saw. At home in New York, the air was heavy with things left unsaid. Eleanor was a tall, quiet girl with a serious face. Her mother, Anna, was a famous beauty who didn't know what to do with a daughter who didn't sparkle in ballrooms. Anna even gave her daughter a nickname that stuck like a burr, Granny. Imagine being a child and having your own mother look at you with a sigh, calling you Granny, because you were too plain and too solemn. Eleanor grew up in a world of high society, where how you looked was your only currency. She felt like a bankrupt tenant in her own life. Every time she walked into a room, she carried a heavy, invisible weight. It was the voice of her mother's disappointment. It was the memory of her father's broken promises. That voice told her she was an outsider. It told her she was an ugly duckling who would never truly belong. This voice didn't just live in the hallway of her home. It moved into her head. It became a constant companion that commented on everything she did. If she spoke, the voice told her she sounded foolish. If she stayed silent, the voice told her she was boring. By the time she was a teenager, Eleanor was convinced that her value was zero. She believed she was a mistake that needed to be hidden. She was living in a mental prison, and the bars were made of her own thoughts. She spent her days trying to be invisible, hoping that if she didn't take up any space, no one would notice how unworthy she was. But then at age 15, Eleanor was sent away to Allenswood, a finishing school in London. There she met a woman named Marie Sylvester. Marie didn't care about ballrooms or beauty. She cared about minds. She saw the tall, awkward girl from New York and didn't see a granny. She saw a girl with a sharp brain and a deep heart. Marie pushed Eleanor to think for herself. She challenged the voices in Eleanor's head by giving her a new job, being useful. For the first time, Eleanor realized that the voice calling her ugly or plain was just a noise. It wasn't the truth. She began to see that her mind was a tool she could use, regardless of what the granny voice said. This was the birth of one of the most powerful realizations in history. Years later, after Eleanor became a world leader and a champion for human rights, she would sum up this lesson in a way that changed millions of lives. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. She didn't mean that people wouldn't try. She meant that the consent happens inside us. It happens when we believe the voice that says we aren't enough. Eleanor had to learn how to stop giving her consent to the critic that had lived in her head since childhood. She had to learn the art of inner quiet. The internal gallery. Most of us don't realize it, but we spend our lives walking through a very specific building. It's a place called the internal gallery. In a normal art gallery, you walk past beautiful paintings. You might see a sunset, a bowl of fruit, or a smiling face. But in the internal gallery of a woman struggling with self-worth, the walls look very different. Imagine walking down a long, dimly lit hallway. On the left, there is a large framed portrait of that time you made a mistake at work 3 years ago. The colors are vivid. You can still feel the heat in your cheeks. On the right, there is a blurry photo of a conversation where you felt awkward and said the wrong thing. Further down, there's a whole wall dedicated to things I should have done better. The inner critic is the tour guide of this gallery. The critic doesn't let you just walk through. She stops you in front of the worst paintings. She points out every flaw. Look at the way your voice shook there, she whispers. Notice how everyone else seems to have it figured out while you're just pretending. We become so used to the tour guide's voice that we forget we are the ones who own the building. We think the tour guide is the boss. We think the paintings are the only things that exist. We walk through this gallery every morning before we even get out of bed, and by the time our feet hit the floor, we are already exhausted. This is exactly what was happening to Elena Vance. Elena sat in her Seattle apartment at 11 p.m. The city lights were twinkling outside her window, but she wasn't looking at them. She was staring at her laptop screen, which was actually turned off. She was trapped in her internal gallery. Earlier that day, Elena had given a presentation to the senior partners at her engineering firm. She was brilliant at her job. She had spent weeks calculating the stress loads for a new bridge project. But during the meeting, her tongue had tripped over a single word. She had stuttered for maybe 2 seconds. Now, hours later, the stutter portrait was the only thing she could see. The inner critic was giving her the full tour. They think you're unprofessional now, the voice said. They're probably wondering how you got this job in the first place. You look so tense. You're not a leader, Elena. You're just a lucky girl who's about to be found out. Elena felt a familiar knot in her stomach. It was a physical tightness, like a fist clenching right under her ribs. She had lived with this knot for so long, she thought it was just part of her anatomy. She didn't realize that the knot was the physical echo of the critic's voice. She was doing what many of us do. She was ruminating. Rumination is a fancy word for chewing on a thought over and over, like a cow chewing grass. The problem is that while cows get nutrients from grass, we only get poison from ruminating on our failures. Elena decided to try something she had read about. She closed her eyes and tried to picture the stutter portrait hanging on the wall of her internal gallery. She saw the frame. She saw the colors of the room. Then she did something brave. She imagined herself taking the painting off the wall. She didn't burn it or throw it away, that takes too much energy. She just moved it to a back room where the lights were off. She realized that the painting was still there, but she didn't have to stand in front of it and stare. She could walk to a different part of the gallery. She could look at the Bridge Success painting instead. For the first time, Elena recognized the critic as something separate from herself. She wasn't the stutter. She wasn't the fear. She was the person watching it all happen. She was the owner of the gallery, not the tour guide's servant. The science of the voice. Why do we have this voice at all? If it makes us so miserable, why hasn't human evolution gotten rid of it? Psychologists have found that the inner critic is actually a very old, very confused part of our brain. Thousands of years ago, being cast out from the tribe meant certain death. If you weren't liked by the group, you wouldn't have food or protection. Your brain developed a warning system to keep you in line. The inner critic is that system. It thinks that if it criticizes you first, it will prevent you from making a mistake that gets you kicked out of the tribe. It says you're boring, so you'll stay quiet and safe. It says you're not ready, so you won't take a risk and fail in public. The problem is that we no longer live in small tribes on the savannah. We live in a world where we need to take risks to grow. The critic is using a 50,000-year-old map to navigate a modern city. It's trying to protect you, but it's doing it by making you play small. Dr. Kristin Neff, a leading researcher on self-compassion, has spent years studying this. She found that most people believe they need their inner critic. We think that if we aren't hard on ourselves, we will become lazy or fail. We treat ourselves like a coach who screams at his players to make them run faster. But Dr. Neff's research shows the opposite is true. When we are constantly criticized, our brains release cortisol, the stress hormone. High levels of cortisol make it harder to think clearly and solve problems. Shouting at yourself actually makes you less capable of fixing your mistakes. On the other hand, self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you'd show a friend, releases oxytocin. This feel-good hormone helps you feel safe. When you feel safe, your brain is free to learn and grow. Another tool scientists use is called cognitive diffusion. This comes from a type of therapy called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Fusion is when you believe your thoughts are the absolute truth. If you think I am a failure and you are fused with that thought, you feel like a failure. Diffusion is putting space between you and the thought. It's the difference between saying I am a failure and saying I am having the thought that I am a failure. It sounds small, doesn't it? But that tiny gap is where your freedom lives. When you realize you are having a thought, you realize the thought isn't you. You are the one observing the thought. Just like Eleanor Roosevelt realized she wasn't the ugly duckling her mother saw, you can realize you aren't the list of flaws your critic recites. The critic's origin story. To master the art of inner quiet, you have to become a bit of a detective. You need to find out where your critic learned to speak. Most of us aren't born with an inner critic. Babies don't look in the mirror and worry about their thigh gap. They don't finish a crawl and think, I should have been more efficient with my left knee. We learn the voice from the people around us. The parental voice. Sometimes the critic sounds exactly like a parent who had very high standards or who was afraid for us. The teacher-coach voice. It might be the voice of someone who told you that you weren't good at math or athletic. The cultural voice. This is the loudest one for many women. It's the voice of magazines, social media, and movies, telling us we need to be thinner, younger, quieter, or more productive. Think back to Eleanor Roosevelt. Her critic's voice was the voice of the New York elite. It was a voice that valued charm over character. Because she didn't have the specific kind of charm they wanted, the voice told her she had no value. When Eleanor went to London and met Marie Sylvester, she heard a different voice. Marie valued courage and intellect. Eleanor had plenty of both. By finding a new tribe with new values, Eleanor was able to see that her critic's origin story was based on a very narrow, very shallow world. If you can trace your critic's voice back to its source, it loses its power. You can look at a thought like "I'm not pretty enough to lead this meeting" and say, "Oh, that's just the 1990s fashion magazines talking. That's not my voice. That's a guest in my gallery who won't leave." Once you identify that the voice isn't yours, you can start to turn down the volume. You don't have to fight the voice, fighting it just makes it louder. You just have to stop taking its advice. Naming the beast. One of the fastest ways to get some space from your inner critic is to give it a name. But don't give it a scary name. Give it a name that makes it hard to take seriously. There was a woman in one of Dr. Neff's studies who named her inner critic Gertrude. Whenever she started to feel like she wasn't doing enough, she would say to herself, "Oh, Gertrude is having a real fit today. She's very worried about the laundry." By naming the voice, you turn it into a character. It's no longer a universal truth coming from the center of your soul. It's just Gertrude, and Gertrude is usually grumpy and wrong. Elena Vance tried this too. She decided to name her critic the auditor. Because she worked in engineering, she was used to auditors who came in to find every tiny mistake in a project. They were necessary for bridges, but they were terrible for human beings. The next time Elena felt that knot in her stomach, she didn't panic. She thought, "The auditor is on a site visit today. He's looking at the stutter again. Let him look. He can stay in that room all day if he wants, but I'm going to go get some coffee and work on the next design." Naming the critic allows you to move from judgment to observation. When you judge yourself, you are in the pain. When you observe yourself, you are standing outside the pain. You are watching the weather instead of being the storm. Eleanor Roosevelt did this by writing in her journals. She would write about her fears as if she were looking at them from a distance. She would acknowledge that she felt shy or inadequate, but she would then decide what she was going to do anyway. She learned that you don't have to wait for the voice to disappear before you act. You can take the voice with you. You can be terrified and still walk onto the stage. You can hear the critic screaming that you're a failure and still hit send on that important email. Confidence isn't the absence of the inner critic. Confidence is the ability to hear the critic and choose to move anyway. The practice of presence. How do we actually find that inner quiet in the middle of a busy day? It's one thing to do it in a quiet apartment like Elena, but what about when your boss is waiting for an answer or your kids are screaming? The secret is presence over performance. Most of our inner critic's noise is about the past, shame, or the future, anxiety. The critic loves to tell you what you did wrong or what will go wrong. It almost never has anything to say about the actual moment you are in. Try this right now. Look at your hands. Notice the way the skin looks over your knuckles. Feel the weight of your body in the chair. Listen for the furthest sound you can hear, maybe a car outside or the hum of a refrigerator. In this exact second, while you are noticing your hands and the sounds, where's the critic? The critic can't survive in the now. It needs the then or the next to breathe. By bringing your attention back to your physical senses, you create a zone of quiet. You aren't trying to think happy thoughts. You are just trying to be where your feet are. Eleanor Roosevelt became a master of this. She was often overwhelmed by the sheer number of people who needed her help. She was the First Lady during the Great Depression and World War II. People wrote her thousands of letters every week. The critic could have easily told her she wasn't doing enough, that she was failing everyone. But Eleanor focused on the person in front of her. Whether she was visiting a coal mine or meeting a world leader, she gave that moment her full presence. She didn't worry about the letter she hadn't answered yet while she was talking to a grieving mother. She stayed where her feet were. This presence is the ultimate shield against self-doubt. When you are fully present, you aren't performing for an audience in your head. You are just doing the task. You are just living the life. Elena started practicing this during her morning commute.